Wolf of the Ridge is marrying the black seamstress. The Jew rolled out of the saloon down every alley, turning the whole town into a stage of mockery. But Dina Monroe did not bow her head. She lifted it high, dark eyes lit with hidden fire. This choice is mine. And that night, in a lonely cabin glowing with firelight, when Wyatt's calloused hand closed trembling over hers, his hoarse voice broke. I have lived too long without a woman's warmth. Dina shivered, lips parting, breath mingling with his outside. Willow Creek kept laughing. But inside those wooden walls, a lifetime of restrained desire burst into flame, defying the world itself. Winter of 1878 settled over Willow Creek in a gray, bitter hush. Morrison's Saloon, standing at the head of the street, was the place where cowhands, miners, and ranch owners usually gathered to trade words over whiskey. But that day, the smoke-filled room was not buzzing about harsh weather or falling beef prices. A single piece of news was passed from table to table, from barkeep to drunkard slumped on the counter. Wyatt Crow, the Wolf of the Ridge, had proposed to Dina Monroe. In an instant, the whispers spread like fire on dry brush. At the corner table, a group of men burst into rough laughter, raising their glasses as though the news was the best joke winter had offered. Wolf of the Ridge marrying that colored seamstress. Lord Almighty, the two of them were born to be a circus. Children skated down the frozen street, chanting verses twisted into cruel songs. They called her Spinster Monroe, a woman left too long on the shelf. They called Wyatt a ghost of the mountain and bound their names together in rhymes so mean-spirited that even grown folks chuckled behind their hands. On the porch of the general store, 3 town wives gathered with their layered skirts and heavy baskets, eyes fixed on the saloon doors as if to catch another scrap of gossip. One shook her head in pity. Poor thing must have run out of any real choice to stoop to this nonsense. Another sniffed. And him? Ain't he that widower our gone mad on the ridge? Lord, what a sight. While rumor swirled like a storm, Dina Monroe sat silent in her narrow sewing room, hands steady as she stitched the lining of a cloak left by a customer. The needle pricked the fabric with measured rhythm, her way of keeping her mind from splitting under the noise outside. The fogged glass pane mirrored her thin figure bent over the work. At 31, she was no stranger to whispers. Yet today, the voices outside cut sharper, pressed harder, as if the walls themselves might give way. The name Wyatt Crow carried shadows in Willow Creek. A widower who had lost wife and child to fever. He had retreated to the northern ridge, living like a hermit. They called him Wolf of the Ridge, a warning for children, a mockery for grown men. 10 years had passed with only brief glimpses of his tall frame and brooding eyes, when he came down for salt, flour, or tobacco. Few dared claim to know him. And yet now it was he who had knelt to ask Dina's hand, the town's colored seamstress, a woman already branded an object of scorn. To the eyes of Willow Creek, the two of them joining was nothing but a spectacle. Still, in the corners of that chorus of ridicule, there were glimmers of doubt. An old cowhand remembered the night Dina patched his coat through a driving rain. A young mother recalled the swaddling cloths she received from Dina's hands when her purse was empty. They said nothing, but in their eyes flickered a thought. Maybe this mockery hid something true. By late afternoon, when the last light of the sun gilded the wooden storefronts, the news had reached every corner of town. Men murmured at the forge. Women whispered at the bakery. Even churchgoers exchanged looks as the minister prepared his Sunday sermon. The whole town had taken its seats for a play no one wished to miss. Dina, closing her shop for the evening, felt the town's breath heavy on her shoulders. Laughter echoed still, sharp and mocking. Yet inside her chest, a strange spark stirred. Not shame, but a thread of something different. She saw again the eyes of Wyatt Crow, the deep hollow gaze that had once met hers as she mended his coat. She remembered his voice, gravel rough yet steady when he asked the question with no flourish, only wait. Dina pressed her palm to her bodice, heart beating harder than she could calm. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but one thought rose clear. Perhaps amid the noise of scorn, another path was waiting. And so it was, the jest that Willow Creek tossed about with cruel delight. That jest would soon alter everything. In the history of Willow Creek, few people bore the mark of being outsiders as plainly as Wyatt Crowe and Dina Monroe. Each walked a lonely path, carrying scars of the past, until their steps crossed in the quiet corners no one else bothered to see. Wyatt had once known a home, a gentle wife with brown hair, a 6-year-old boy whose laughter filled the cabin beneath the ridge, both gone within a week when fever swept through the valley. Folks said that after burying them, Wyatt spoke little to anyone. His blue eyes turned hollow as dying timber. He left the town, built a cabin high on the northern slope, and lived like a man exiled by choice. They gave him a name, Wolf of the Ridge. At first, it was only a warning to keep children away from the mountain, but over time, it became fixed in the town's memory. When people spoke of Wyatt, they pictured the tall figure in a dark coat, eyes that belonged nowhere. Dina Monroe carried another story. Her parents, hard-working black artisans, lost everything in a great fire. They left her a small sewing shop and a debt not yet paid. Orphaned in her early 20s, Dina held fast to the last fragment of her family's life. In those years, she believed she might still escape contempt through love. Samuel Pearce, a fair-haired man from a well-off family, once promised her a home. But when his kin objected, saying Dina was not of their color, not of their standing, Samuel slipped away in silence, leaving her to face the whispers alone. From then on, Dina knew the ache of being left behind, of love betrayed not by anger, but by cowardice. The years that followed tied her to the sewing shop. She stitched clothes for miners, patched coats for widows, mended garment after garment in steady silence. Yet whenever she walked the street, the town's eyes cut her down. Old maid, colored woman, unwanted. The first time their paths crossed was not with the proposal that stirred the town, but in a moment small and fleeting. Dina carried a heavy bolt of cloth from the warehouse. The cold made her hands tremble. The roll slipped and tumbled into the snow and mud. As she bent to lift it, a large calloused hand reached first. Wyatt Crowe stood over her, stooping to raise the weight as if it were nothing. Their hands brushed, cold and warm, rough and soft, and Dina startled back. Wyatt only gave a quiet nod and placed the cloth in her arms, not a word spoken. Another time, Wyatt brought in his worn coat for repair. Dina measured the sleeve length. As she looped the tape over his shoulder, her breath brushed the collar of his dark coat. The nearness unsettled her. Wyatt remained still, his blue eyes lowered, steady, while her heart raced at the closeness. The last time she saw him before the rumors broke was in the narrow alley behind her shop. Rain drifted in thin lines. Wyatt tilted his wide-brimmed hat to shield her as a gust rattled the door. His cloak swept broad across his back as he braced the door against Chung the wind. They stood near enough that Dina could hear the slow, even rhythm of his breath. When she glanced up, she caught his gaze. Deep, weighted, carrying meaning without a single word. To the town. They were nothing more than two left behind, a hermit widower and a black seamstress spurned. But in those small collisions, in the awkward brush of hands, in the glances that lingered, in the breath shared across a moment, something unspoken began to take root. If Willow Creek laughed at the thought of their union, calling it a farce, their pasts gave it weight of another kind. His proposal was not pity. It was the meeting of two souls abandoned by the world, finding one another in the dark. And from those fragments, the story began. That morning, Dina Monroe's little sewing shop was steeped in the scent of new cloth and the steady tap of her needle against wood. Outside, the wind carried cold from the ridge, seeping through the frosted panes. She was used to the quiet rhythm of her days, the few footsteps, the brief instructions from customers. She never guessed the door would open on a turn that would alter her life. The bell chimed soft. Dina lifted her head. The man who entered thickened the air around him. Wyatt Crowe, broad-shouldered, tall, moving with a slow but certain gait. His dark coat held the dust of the road. His wide-brimmed hat shadowed part of his face, but his eyes, deep blue and unyielding, could not be mistaken. They had crossed hers before, each time leaving a tremor she could not forget. Dina swallowed, striving for steadiness. "Do you need something mended?" Wyatt did not answer at once. He removed his hat, set it on the table, and stood as though facing not only her but the whole town, whispering outside. Then, in a voice rough and low, he said, "Dina Monroe. I have come to ask for your hand." The needle slipped from her fingers, clattering on the floor, a small sound that rang in her ears like a church bell. She froze, hands gripping the edge of the table. In her mind echoed the laughter, the children's cruel songs, the pitying looks of the women on the street. All of it pressed down at once. She shook her head, a dry laugh escaping. "You must be jesting. The town will say this is the grandest joke they've ever seen." Wyatt did not move. He stepped closer, his eyes steady on her. "Let them laugh, Dina. They have laughed at me, called me a wolf, a ghost. They have laughed at you, called you a spinster, a colored woman, but I do not see you as they do." Her breath caught sharp. His words struck where she had long buried her pain. He stepped nearer still, his voice deep as wind through a canyon. "I see you, Dina Monroe. I see your hands sewing clothes for this whole town without asking more than a fair penny. I see you walking past their scorn with your back unbent. I see your eyes sorrowed yet strong. And I want to spend the rest of my days seeing you, not with pity, but as a man looks upon his wife." Each word landed like a hammer against the shell around her heart. She drew back, her shoulders brushing the rack of cloth, feeling the space narrow as if she were cornered. And yet, deep inside, some part of her no longer wished to flee. Samuel Pierce's face flickered in memory. The fair-haired suitor who had let her go, too weak to defy his family. The women's wrinkled sneers, the children's taunts, all rose in a wave. If she said yes, would she not become their centerpiece of mockery? But if she refused, she would return to silence, to needles and empty nights, to a cold that never carried waiting. Wyatt pressed nothing on her. He stood still, one hand resting lightly on the table, his rough fingers drumming slow. His eyes did not leave hers, but neither did they demand. Dina bowed her head, dark hair spilling to hide the heat in her cheeks. She heard the thud of her own heart, uneven yet alive with something new, like a seed buried in dry ground, stirring at last. After a silence that seemed to stretch without end, she whispered, I do not know how to answer." Wyatt nodded, set his hat back upon his head. Before turning to go, he left words heavier than any vow. "You need not answer now. But remember, Dina, I see you, and I will go on seeing you until the day you believe it true." The door closed behind him, leaving Dina amid the scent of cloth and the scattered needle. Outside, no doubt the town was already laughing, or soon would be. But within her chest, something else had stirred, faint but certain. A fragile, half-formed belief that her heart was not yet dead. And so the first seed was sown. News of Wyatt Crow's proposal spread faster than the winter wind. Within a day, all of Willow Creek was speaking of it at the forge, in the bakery, even on the church pews. Laughter rolled along the streets, though beneath it ran a current of curiosity. Folks were waiting to see what the colored seamstress and the wolf of the ridge would do next. Late in the afternoon, as Dina bent over her cutting table, the shop door opened. Not a regular customer, but three women known by every soul in town. Mrs. Fletcher, Mrs. Connors, and Mrs. Reed, the wives of the wealthiest ranchers, women whose names carried weight like iron, their layered skirts rustled, gloved hands poised, each step carrying the authority of the families behind them. "Dina Monroe," Mrs. Fletcher began, her tone soft but cold. "We've come to offer advice. This matter with Wyatt Crow, you should put an end to it. Do not make yourself the town's laughingstock." Mrs. Connors clicked her tongue, eyes full of false pity. A colored woman past 30. "You understand, don't you? No one will treat you kindly if you take him. People will say you two cling to each other. Only because there's no one else." Dina laid her scissors down. Her hand trembled, yet she did not bow her head. Her dark eyes lifted, meeting each expectant face. Heat swelled in her chest. Not shame, but anger. "You speak this way," Dina said, her voice steady as iron, "because you've never lived under another's heel. I know who I am. I do not need your pity. And I do not need your permission. The three women stiffened as if they could not believe such words had come from Dina. The quiet seamstress who had long lowered her gaze. The air strained taut as a fiddle string, then snapped as they turned, skirt sweeping, leaving behind the heavy scent of perfume tangled with fresh cloth. Dina stood, breath quick, chest rising and falling. She knew from that moment she had crossed a line. The bell chimed again. This time the man who entered pulled her heart down. Samuel Pearce. He was unchanged. Fair hair, the polished smile that had once undone her, but his eyes now held the pity she despised. He set aside his gloves and hat, speaking gently, almost sweetly. Dina, I heard. Wyatt Crowe, are you certain? You deserve better. You were once important to me. I can't bear to see you turn yourself into a joke. The words seemed tender, yet in Dina's ears, they cut like a blade across an old scar. She remembered the day he turned away, silent, while she bore the town's cruelty alone. His so-called importance had never been strong enough to stand beside her when she needed him. Her grip tightened on the table. Slowly, she said, Samuel, do you remember that day the whole town cast me out? Do you recall what you did? You stayed silent. You left me to bear the shame alone. That was when I became their joke. Not now. Color drained from Samuel's face, though he forced a smile. I only wanted what was best for you. Dina shook her head, eyes glowing like coals. No, you wanted to keep your own image clean. As for me, Samuel Pearce, I have no use for your late-born pity. Silence pressed heavy, broken only by the faint drop of a pin to the floor. Samuel had no answer. From the doorway, a shadow filled the frame. Wyatt Crowe. He did not stride in with noise. He stood hat in hand, his blue eyes sweeping the scene. His gaze lingered on Dina, then on Samuel. The contrast was stark. Samuel, neat, half-smiling, his hands untouched by labor. Wyatt, dust on his coat, stand solid, silence weighty as stone. Dina felt her breath ease. His presence alone steadied her. Samuel gave a shrug, forced a grin, and turned on his heel. Dina watched him go, yet the ache was gone. Instead, her heart beat hard at the quiet strength standing beside her. Wyatt stepped forward, saying nothing ornate. He simply set his callous hand on the table close to hers, a gesture heavy as a vow. I am here. Dina looked at the space between their hands, only an inch apart, yet enough to tell her that in a world of laughter and scorn, she had found a wall of stone to stand against it. And for the first time in many years, Dina Monroe no longer felt the need to bow before anyone. That morning, the sky over Willow Creek shone blinding blue. Sunlight scattered like salt across the red dust road, lighting every curious face that gathered toward the small hill where the plain wooden church stood among the pines. On a usual Sunday, only a handful of worshippers filled its benches. But today, the church was packed to the rafters. No one had come to pray. They had come to watch what they called the greatest farce of the year. Word of the marriage between Wyatt Crowe, the recluse of the Northern Ridge, known as the Wolf of the Ridge, and Dina Monroe. The colored seamstress, long mocked as Spinster Monroe, had spread through the valley like dry wind over grass. Folks whispered it would be the strangest play Wyoming had ever seen. The crowd had come, their laughter ready. Inside, wooden chairs scraped, whispers hissed, children snickered. Men placed small bets on whether the bride would cry at the altar or if the groom would stagger in drunk. Ladies in wide-brimmed hats feigned solemn faces, their lips twitching with anticipation of fresh scorn. Behind the door, Dina stood still. Her dress of deep blue wool stitched by her own hands, clung to her frame. Plain cloth but crafted with care. White shell buttons shining where the sun touched. On her breast, a silver brooch, her mother's last gift, fastened firm, a reminder of roots that could not be torn away. Her hand tightened around a small bouquet of wildflowers gathered from the meadow near the cabin. She drew a steady breath. The church bell tolled, the doors opened. Dina stepped inside. At once the whispers flared. Blue dress for a wedding. Shell buttons. Does she think they hide her face? Pitiful. A joke dressed as a bride. Dina heard it all. Yet her stride was firm, her head lifted, her eyes straight ahead. Then silence fell heavy. The doors opened again. Wyatt Crowe entered. He was not the ragged hermit they expected, the unkempt beard, the worn hide coat. Today he wore a black suit cut close, a white shirt stiff at the collar, his hair trimmed, his beard neat, the weathered face marked by a scar across the cheek, no longer savage, but commanding, his black boots gleamed beneath the light. Hat in hand, he walked steady down the aisle. The church held its breath. Women who had scorned him as a beast now flushed red, their eyes betraying surprise. Yet Wyatt spared none a glance. His gaze locked on Dina, waiting at the far end. Step by step, the jeers thinned into silence. The air thickened with something nameless. At the altar, Judge Merriweather cleared his throat. His face twitched with disdain half hidden. We are gathered here to witness the unusual union of Wyatt Crowe and Dina Monroe. He stretched the words, fishing for laughter, but none came. The silence bound them all. When it was time for vows, Wyatt spoke first. His voice low and graveled, filled the timbered hall. I, Wyatt Crowe, take you Dina Monroe as my wife. I vow to honor you, to guard you, and to see you for who you are, not as the town calls you. I vow to share with you both hardship and joy through the coldest winters and the harshest summers. Simple words, no ornament. Yet the weight of them stilled every tongue. Dina's hands trembled, but her voice rose clearer than she believed possible. I, Dina Monroe, take you, Wyatt Crowe, as my husband. I vow to stand beside you through every storm, to keep fire in our home with trust and truth. I vow never to let fear make me small, but to walk with you as an equal companion. A sharp breath cut the air. Murmurs faltered. A few faces bent low, ashamed to meet her gaze. Judge Merriweather stumbled, then hurried to finish. I declare you man and wife. The groom may kiss the bride. The crowd leaned forward, hungry for a spectacle, a clumsy kiss, a coarse show to feed their mirth. But Wyatt only lifted Dina's face with hands calloused and gentle. He bent slowly, carefully, and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss brief, tender, fierce in its quiet dignity. The church froze. No laughter, no clapping, only silence, heavy and unyielding, as though the moment had broken something they had all clung to. Hand in hand, Wyatt and Dina turned, walking down the aisle together. Dina's head was high, her step steady. Wyatt's stride was a wall at her side. Outside, sunlight poured bright over the dust, horses shifting in their traces. Among the stairs, hesitant now, a truth had taken root. The grandest jest of the year had become a silent rebuke to all of Willow Creek. The road from Willow Creek up to the northern ridge was rough and lonesome. The old wagon creaked as it rattled over hard gravel, leaving a faint trail of dust behind. Dina sat beside him, her hands hidden beneath her skirt, clasped tight as if to hold her composure. This was the first time she left the town not to flee its gossip, but to begin a life wholly different, with the man the town half feared, half scorned as the wolf of the ridge. Wyatt sat quiet, reins firm in his hands. He spoke little, only leaning toward her when the wagon jolted hard, shielding her from the worst of the sway. The sun sank behind the pines, its last light spilling gold across the tall trunks. When a curl of blue smoke rose beyond the ridge, Dina caught her first glimpse of his cabin. The house stood solid, roof pitched, chimney tall. Stacks of firewood lined the porch. Beyond the orchestra rested under shadow. Dina paused. She had heard the whispers. Wyatt's cabin no better than a beast's den. Yet before her was a home, plain but steadfast, and it carried a strange sense of safety. "This is my home," Wyatt said in his rough, low voice. Then after a beat, "Now it is yours, too." Dina nodded faintly and stepped inside. The space was warmer than she imagined. A stone hearth blazing, shelves holding a few worn books, hunting knives hung in order along the wall. The air held resin of pine and faint smoke of cured meat. Dina let her hand brush the wooden table, tracing the grooves left by hammer and chisel. A quiet pride stirred in her chest. Supper was simple, hot broth and coarse bread. They ate in silence, only the fire crackling. Wyatt gathered the bowls, then motioned toward a small door by the stove. "I'll sleep in the storeroom. The bed is yours." Dina's head lifted, her pulse quick. The thought of lying alone in a strange bed struck her with emptiness rather than relief. As he passed, her hand rose, trembling but firm to catch his wrist. "No," she whispered, meeting his gaze. "This bed belongs to us both." Wyatt froze. The firelight split his face into shadow and glow, his blue eyes shifting like unsettled waters. Slowly, he nodded. No words. He laid the blanket down. That night they lay side by side beneath a heavy quilt. Wyatt turned away, holding distance. Dina listened to his breathing, steady yet taut with restraint. Her own heart raced. Outside, wind howled through the pines. Inside, silence pressed close. At last, Wyatt broke it. His voice rasped low in the dark. "Dina, I fear I've forgotten how to love." She turned, her eyes finding the broad line of his back. Her own reply came halting, fragile. "And I have never truly been loved." The confession hung between them, bare and painful, two broken halves meeting. Wyatt rolled back, his shadow falling across the timbered wall. He reached, hesitant, hand open, but wordless. Dina hesitated only a moment before placing her small hand into his, cold and warm, rough and trembling, locked together. He bent slowly, afraid she would retreat. Dina tilted her face up, breath quick, eyes half shut, their lips brushed, uncertain, trembling, like strangers stumbling in the dark. She shivered. He began to draw away, but her hand clutched his shirt, holding him near. The second kiss sank deeper, not rushed, not grasping, an earnest search, careful and steady. Two lonely souls testing the way forward. Every touch was a step, every breath a bridge. Heat spread and Dina felt tears slide down her cheek. Not sorrow, but the shock of being seen. His coat fell to the floorboards. The quilt slipped from her shoulder. They moved closer, every shift like a test of courage. Many times he paused, eyes searching. And Dina, with small nods through trembling breath, gave him strength. Through the long night, breath mingled, timbers creaked, hearts pounded. Outside, the wind roared and snow fell heavy. Inside, fire flared, and two bodies long denied, finally found each other, hesitant, yearning like a first time. Yet, as though fated across all their years, when the fire burned low and their skin cooled with sweat, Wyatt held her tight, his voice breaking raw. "You've given me more than I ever dared hope." Dina pressed her cheek against his chest, hearing the strong beat within and whispered, "And you are the first to ever see me as I am." Beyond the walls, snow blanketed the ridge. But in the small cabin, for the first time in years, neither of them felt the cold. Winter on the northern ridge was unlike anywhere else. The wind cut down from snow peaks sharp enough to tear flesh. Willow Creek was used to rooftops buried under white, but higher up, a storm could steal a man's life in a single breath. Wyatt Crow knew this well. He had been born and raised among the mountains. Yet, even for the wolf of the ridge, there were nights when nature humbled him. That morning he rode down into the valley to check the cattle set loose for winter forage. Snow had begun to fall like fine dust, and he reckoned he would be back before dark. But the wind turned swift, the clouds rolled black, and the blizzard came on fierce. The valley vanished in white. Wind lashed his eyes blind. His horse panicked, slipped, and went down. Wyatt struck the ice hard, his head ringing, blood running warm into the snow. He staggered upright, chest heaving, but every direction was the same, a wall of storm. At the cabin, Dina waited. Dusk came with no sign of him. Fear rose sharp inside her. She remembered too clearly the town's cruel murmur. "The wolf will be buried in snow one day." Her heart seized. She wrapped herself in a thick cloak, tied a scarf, lit the storm lantern, and stepped into the dark heedless of wind that clawed her skin raw. Each step sank to her knees. The cold pierced her lungs like needles, but she pressed on, following the faint tracks of hooves nearly buried already. Her hands were numb, but she held the lantern fast, its glow flickering in the gale. Whenever her strength faltered, she clung to the memory of Wyatt's gaze at the altar, his vow to see her. She could not let him vanish into the indifferent night. At last, in a hollow drift, she saw a dark form crumpled beside the trembling horse. "Wyatt! Wyatt!" she cried, her voice ripped away by wind. She dropped to her knees, lifting his head with trembling hands. His face was bloodless. Lips blue but breath still faint. She bit down on fear and heaved, dragging him over the horse's back. Taking the residential herself, she led the beast step by step, staggering under the storm's weight. The horse limped but followed. By the time they reached the cabin, Dina was near spent. She hauled Wyatt inside, stripped away his frozen coat, stoked the fire high. But the blaze was not enough. His body was ice, breath fading. Without hesitation, she pulled him under the quilt, pressed herself against his bulk, giving him what warmth she had. All through the night, she held him, clutching him as if to bind his soul in place. Each time he shuddered, she tightened her arms, laid her cheek against his chest. Sweat and tears mixed on her face as the fire spat sparks. She whispered over and over like a prayer through cracked lips. "Don't leave me, Wyatt. You saw me. Don't take that away." By dawn, the storm had passed. Outside lay a still white world, pines heavy with frost. Inside, his breathing grew deeper, steadier. His eyes opened at last, dazed, blue sharpening into focus. He saw Dina, hair tangled, face drawn, yet eyes fierce with fire. His lips moved, voice rough and broken. "You saved me." Dina wept, but her tears were light with relief. She buried her face against his chest, feeling his heartbeat return strong beneath her ear. Wyatt lifted a shaking hand, his calloused finger brushing her cheek, wiping away the tears. His eyes spoke the truth plain. His life now bound to hers, not only by vow, but by survival itself. That night had driven them across a line. No longer two companions walking wearily side by side. From that day on, Wyatt Crowe and Dina Monroe belonged wholly to each other, not just in desire, but in a bond undeniable. They had held each other's very lives. The snow had melted, spring laying ruts of mud and water along the roads, but danger clung to the wild hills like a shadow. Wyatt's cabin stood apart, quiet to the eyes of strangers. But Dina knew well. Quiet did not mean safe. One afternoon, with Wyatt gone down valley for salt and ammunition, Dina kept to her work. She stoked the fire, hung fabric to dry while on the loft rail, her mind at ease. Then came the pounding of hooves outside, sharp and many. 3 figures appeared in the yard. They were rough men, beards unkempt, dust-caked leather coats, pistols slung loose at their hips. One banged on the door, laughing loud. "Heard the wolf's got himself a new wife. Open up, girl. Let us see the bird he's hid away in his den." Dina's hands tightened, but she showed no fear. She opened the door and stood tall. Her dark eyes met theirs, steady against their hungry stares. "Wyatt is not here," she said firm. "If you've business, you'll speak it like men." They roared with laughter, shoving past her into the cabin. One tossed his hat on the table. Another leaned his rifle against a chair. "Girl, all we want is a little welcome. A hot cup of coffee will do." Dina swallowed slow, then gave a faint smile. "Coffee, then sit." She turned toward the kitchen, heart hammering, hands calm. From a small jar hidden on the shelf, she took dried herbs, her mother's old remedy, one that sent fevered patients into heavy sleep. She crumbled it fine, let it fall into the boiling pot. The bitter scent was quickly masked by roasted beans. Carrying the tray out, she set cups before them. The men lifted their mugs, gulping deep, still laughing. Dina sat across, gaze even, as though nothing more than a hostess tending her guests. Within half an hour, their eyelids drooped, one cursed under his breath. "Hell, why am I so tired?" He slumped face first onto the table. The second lurched, hand fumbling at his pistol before collapsing in a heap. The last staggered to his feet, swaying, and fell heavy to the floor. Soon the cabin rang with drunken snores. Dina rose, lifting Wyatt's revolver from the shelf. She leveled it steady at the outlaws sprawled across her floor, her voice hard. "Leave your horses and get out, or you'll lie in the snow till spring." Groggy and pale, they stirred awake to the sight of iron aimed straight. None dared laugh now. They stumbled into the yard, dragging one another, mounting unsteadily before riding off at a gallop, their shouts fading among the gray trees. Dina stood still, breath ragged, finger trembling on the trigger. Only when the door shut firm behind them did she let her back rest against the table, exhaling long. Moments later, hooves beat the yard again, this time familiar. "Wyatt." He swung down from the saddle, eyes sharp as he caught sight of tracks and scattered signs of intrusion. He burst inside. Dina turned. In that moment, his blue eyes fell on her, hair tangled, chest heaving, revolver in hand, standing tall as firelight burned behind her. He stopped short, then crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms with a force that near crushed her. "Dina," his voice broke low, raw. "If I'd lost you, I couldn't have borne it." She leaned against his shoulder, surrendering to the rough, steady arms that locked around her. And in that trembling embrace of a man who had lived most of his life in silence, Dina understood this love was not only hunger or longing. It was the one refuge that kept them alive in the wild mountains. In the days after the outlaws came, it was as if Dina had stepped through an unseen door. Fear no longer pressed on her as it once had. In its place burned a new fire, a will to stand not only beside Wyatt but also for herself. Wyatt saw it before she did. One morning he laid his old rifle on the table, his deep blue eyes fixed on her. "It's time you learned how to use this." Dina hesitated. There had been a time when even the sound of distant gunfire made her flinch. Now she nodded. Out behind the cabin on the windswept clearing, Wyatt showed her how to stand, how to find balance. Her first shot went wide, the recoil bruising her shoulder. Dina gasped, half laughing through the sting. Wyatt stepped close, his arm circling behind her to steady her stance. His breath warmed her neck, his rough hand guiding her arm, and her heart stammered. "Hold it firm. Don't fight it. Let it become part of you." Bit by bit, Dina learned to breathe with the rhythm, to let the rifle's kick roll through her. Each time the bullet struck the wooden target, light sparked in her eyes. From clumsy to sure, she grew steady, and with every smile of triumph, Wyatt could not look away. One afternoon, while gathering herbs near the creek, Dina heard a faint whimper. She found a wolf pup shivering in the grass, its gray fur wet, its eyes still closed. Its mother was nowhere. She stared at it and remembered the names the town had thrown at her. Spinster, stray. And now, seeing this lost creature, she felt a kinship. She wrapped it in her cloak and carried it home. Wyatt frowned at first. "You know, raising it won't be easy. A wolf is no dog." Dina's smile was calm but fierce. "I was no one the town wanted either. Yet I've survived." Wyatt stood silent, then gave a slow nod. The pup grew under her care. Its pale eyes shining wild yet gentle at her side. Soon whispers spread in the valley of the black seamstress with a wolf at her heel. Summer brought a fever among the woodcutters who lived deep in the forest. Shunned by town folk, they kept to their huts, weak and afraid. Dina remembered her mother's old remedies. She filled a satchel with herbs and walked the long paths through streams and thicket, tending the sick one by one. Calloused hands and hollow faces turned to her with gratitude. Where she had once been, the woman left aside. Now even strangers spoke her name with respect. Some called her healer of the rich. Others said, if not for Dina Monroe, many children would not have lived through the summer. One evening, Wyatt came back from splitting wood. From the porch, he saw Dina seated with the wolf pup in her lap, mending the torn coat of a woodcutter who had stopped by. The last light of day cast her face in gold, deep eyes alight with quiet strength. A swell rose in Wyatt's chest, sharp and near painful. He remembered the woman he first met. Head bowed, silent, mocked by all of Willow Creek. Now before him, she was no longer that shadow. Dina Monroe had become a fire, not only warm, but radiant. He stepped to her side, laying his rough hand upon her shoulder. Dina lifted her gaze, weary yet smiling bright. Wyatt did not need words. In his eyes, she already knew. Her change had not only steadied her, but deepened the love between them. Once despised, she now stood as a symbol of quiet strength. And Wyatt Crow knew he was no longer just her protector. He was the fortunate man allowed to walk beside a flame that could never be put out. A year had passed since the wedding mocked as a farce. By now, Wyatt Crow and Dina Monroe were no longer the butt of gossip, but a part of the mountain itself, living quiet, proud, unbent. Then, in August, with snow long melted, Willow Creek prepared for its grandest day of the year, Founders' Day, the town's own celebration of its beginning. Banners flapped across the street. Stalls lined tight. Banjo strings rang above the laughter of children. Folks poured in from the valleys, swelling the town to its largest crowd in memory. And through the bustle, one couple's arrival sent whispers rising like a tide. Dina Monroe, no longer the seamstress who once slipped through market streets with her head down. Today she wore a dress of deep blue sewn with flawless hands, her posture tall, her hair tied neat to show a face bright with strength. In her dark eyes, no shadow of fear remained, only steady faith. At her side walked Wyatt Crow, clad in a long gray coat, his gaze cold to others, but carrying a silent pride. The crowd murmured. She looks different. Who would have thought Dina Monroe would stride across the square like this? Children who had once mocked her with cruel rhymes now fell silent, staring wide at the wolf, grown full, padding close beside her as if bound by blood. Part of the festival was the shooting contest. Willow Creek's pride. Men of the valley boasted of their speed, their aim, their skill. When Dina stepped forward to enter, laughter broke in a rush. Her with a gun. A new jest for the town. Dina said nothing. She took the rifle, stepped into place. Wyatt stood back, arms crossed, eyes fixed on her alone. The signal blew. Dina raised the rifle, breathed deep, squeezed the trigger. The shot struck dead center. The crowd fell silent. Second shot. Third shot. Each bullet buried in the mark. Shouts broke loose. Astonishment, then a wave of cheers, ragged but true. Dina lowered the rifle for a heartbeat. Silence hung heavy. Then one clap rang, then another, until the sound swelled through the crowd. Even those who once despised her now found their eyes unwilling to turn away. Wyatt watched, the edge of a smile touching his lips. He knew Dina did not hunger for applause, yet today she had claimed something larger for herself and before the town. But out of the throng stepped a familiar face. Samuel Pearce, still polished, code-pressed, smile practiced. Yet Dina saw only the false shine in his eyes. He bowed slightly. Dina, you have changed so much. I'm glad for you. But tell me, are you truly happy out there in the wilderness with a man like Wyatt Crow? The words were soft, but loud enough for ears nearby. Heads turned, the crowd's buzz faltered. Samuel's smile widened, believing he had struck at an old wound. Dina met his gaze, her own voice clear as steel. Samuel Pearce, you left me when the whole town turned its back. You have no right to ask if I am happy. My happiness is no longer held in another's eyes, least of all in your false pity. The crowd rippled with shock. Samuel's face flushed, his lips drawn tight. Before he could answer, Wyatt stepped forward, standing solid beside Dina. He spoke no word, only laid his rough hand against her back, his blue eyes fixed cold on Samuel. The silence that followed was heavier than threat. Samuel swallowed hard, then stepped back, his smile breaking into a grimace. Dina stood tall, her head lifted, not to defy scorn, but to declare freedom. And at her side, Wyatt Crow was a wall, needing no speech. His presence alone was enough. That afternoon, as sunlight poured gold across the square, the talk of Willow Creek carried her name. No one dared call her a jest again. They spoke with wonder, even respect. And as Wyatt clasped her hand and led her from the crowd, Dina knew here, in the very town that once jarred her down, the past lay buried. Ahead waited storms yet unknown. But she would walk into them with her head high, and with the man who stood unshaken beside her. Music swelled from the small band in Willow Creek's town hall. Banjo strings tangled with violin. The steady beat of a drum shook the wooden floor. Folks crowded shoulder to shoulder. Whiskey sloshing in their glasses. Laughter spilling like spring water over stone. Founders Day had reached its height. The dance everyone waited for. Dina Monroe stood quietly in the corner. Her dark blue dress sewn by her own hands shifted faintly with the draft from the open windows. A year ago this very hall had buried her under scorn. Smirks, whispers, the kind of laughter that bent her head low. But tonight her gaze was steady, her back unbent, her eyes bright with a pride that burned away every shadow of the past. Wyatt Crow stepped toward her. He was broad-shouldered, face lined by mountain winds, a man built from stone and silence. Yet in this moment he carried himself with the gravity of a gentleman. He held out his hand, rough and scarred, but steady as the earth. Dina, his voice was low, rasped by years of solitude. Dance with me. A hush caught her. Then she placed her hand in his. Soft met calloused, frail met unyielding. Around them the murmurs stirred. She's truly going to with him in front of everyone. Wyatt gave no ear to it. He led her onto the floor. The tune softened. The tempo slowed. Dina faltered at first. Her life was measured more by the turn of a sewing wheel than the steps of a dance. Yet one slight squeeze of Wyatt's hand set her steady. He guided her with the same shiety he had guided her through storm and snow. Step by step the stiffness fell away. Her dress spun beneath the lamplight. The careful bun or shack-offs of her hair loosed a few strands that brushed her cheek. Each time Wyatt lowered his gaze, his eyes sought hers. Deep, calm, and resolute. Dina felt her heart fall into the rhythm of the music. No fear, no hiding. The hall grew quiet. Laughter thinned. Whispers died. The jeers faded until there was nothing but silence heavy with awe. They no longer saw the discarded seamstress. What stood before them was a woman, radiant, alive, her head lifted high as she moved with the man once branded Wolf of the Ridge. Someone clapped, then another. Soon the hall pulsed with applause. Yet the eyes of all stayed fixed on Dina. In Wyatt's arms, she tilted her face upward, a faint smile on her lips, her dark eyes gleaming in the glow of the oil lamps. She knew it at last. She no longer feared their gaze. She was seen wholly, and she was enough. As the music waned, Wyatt bent close, his voice, but proud. They'll remember you now, Dina, not through slander, but through reverence. Dina tightened her hand in his, tears brimming, though her smile shone through. And in that moment, beneath the weight of a hushed hall, Willow Creek bowed to a truth that could not be denied. The honor of Dina Monroe was restored. Wyatt led her from the floor. Yet the echo of it lingered. The WA townsfolk watched them go, not with suspicion, not with pity, but with respect. From this day forward, Dina was no longer their jest. She was their emblem of strength, of faith, of a soul risen from scorn into light. The years moved like a stream through stone, quiet, unrelenting. Snow fell and melted. Grass returned each spring, and the cabin of Wyatt and Dina grew into more than a shelter. To the wild, it was a beacon of firelight. To people, it became a place to turn when trouble pressed close. A lost woodcutter once stumbled there in a storm and found warmth for the night. A fevered child lived because Dina brewed the herbs her mother had taught her. A wounded hunter was carried on Wyatt's back across miles of mountain trail. Each story, when retold, added another glow to their names. Whispers spread, then turned into steady talk. The black seamstress they once laughed at is now the mountain's legend. And the wolf of the ridge is no longer a specter, but a man who built a home for all who need one. Children still sang songs, but no longer cruel rhymes. They passed along tales of Dina Monroe, bright-eyed with a gray wolf trailing at her side, and Wyatt Crow, whose hands were hard as oak, yet whose heart carried gentleness. The first cry of their child broke the silence of the mountain night. Outside, snow drifted against the cabin walls, but inside a fragile flame had been lit, one that would change everything. Dina held the infant close, her dark eyes wide with awe. She had stitched clothes for children her whole life, yet never thought her own arms would cradle one. Wyatt knelt beside her, shoulders trembling, though he had faced storms and gunmen without fear. His calloused hand brushed the child's cheek, rough against the softness. He whispered, voice thick. "Dina, this little one is proof we were never a jest." The baby grew with the seasons, laughter ringing where once there had been only silence. Dina's lullabies floated through the rafters, sweeter than any hymn. Wyatt, who had lived years alone in cold solitude, now found himself rising at dawn, not only to split wood, but to rock a restless child against his chest. His deep voice, gruff to most ears, soothed the infant like the low hum of the mountain wind. When spring thawed the ridge, Dina carried the baby out onto the porch. She showed him the valley below, the fields greening again. "This is your world," she whispered. The wolf pup that had once followed her still lingered near the cabin, older now, but calm, watching over the child as though it understood. Neighbors began to come, not to jeer, not to pry, but to glimpse the child of Wyatt and Dina. Some brought small gifts, a blanket, a carved rattle, a loaf of bread. Their faces carried a quiet wonder, for in that child they saw not mockery, but the start of something new. Years later, folks in Willow Creek would still talk about it. How a seamstress scorned and a hermit feared had brought forth life upon the mountain. How the sound of a child's laughter drifted down the slopes like a hymn of defiance against every cruel word spoken before. At night by the fire, Wyatt would watch Dina nurse the baby, her face glowing in the lamplight. He thought back to the vow he had spoken in the church, the promise to see her truly. And he realized now that vow was no longer his alone. This child too would grow up seeing her not as the world once did, but as she was, strong, radiant, beloved, and in the hush of the mountains, as snow fell and fire burned steady, Wyatt Crow, once the wolf of the ridge, finally knew the meaning of home. Time, though, gives no mercy. Wyatt's hair silvered, his shoulders bent. Dina's nimble fingers grew shaky, her eyes squinting through a glass to thread a needle. Yet in each other's gaze, they still saw that first day. The moment two forsaken souls chose to see one another. One evening, as the sun bled red across the ridges, they sat together on the porch. The wolf they had raised was long gone. Yet its cry still echoed faint and far, a reminder of kinship with the wild. Dina rested her head on Wyatt's shoulder, her thin hand twined with his calloused grip. Wyatt's voice came low, rough as wind through pines. "Dina, you were never plain, never small. You were only waiting for a man with clear enough eyes to see it." Dina laughed softly, tears glinting at her lashes. The bitterness of old scorn was gone. What remained was simple truth. They had lived, they had loved, and they had turned her into a legacy of trust. Before them, the mountains burned with sunset, shadows long upon the porch boards. Two aged hands stayed clasped, a vow etched deeper than any spoken word. People said that years later, the story of Wyatt Crow and Dina Monroe was still told around campfires, in fairgrounds, by homestead hearths. The details blurred with time, but the heart of it endured. Love that rose from ridicule and became legend. And somewhere on those ridges, beneath a sky set aflame by dusk, two old figures still sat hand in hand, leaving their mark in the hearts of all who heard their names. Some stories need no ornament, no lofty words. They live in long silences, in the patience of a gaze, in hands that remain locked together, though worn by years. The tale of Wyatt Crow and Dina Monroe is one of those stories. When they began, Willow Creek called them a jest. A hermit with the name of Wolf, a seamstress mocked as unwanted. They had nothing to earn respect. Yet season by season, through labor and love, they turned laughter into truth that forced others to bow their heads. Perhaps all of us have known days like Dina, head lowered beneath the weight of others' scorn. And perhaps we have known nights like Wyatt's, hollow with loss, certain we had forgotten the shape of love. But when such souls meet, they can teach each other how to see what is good. And that alone can change everything. At the end they asked for no glory. Only this, that one person remembered. You were never plain, only waiting for the right eyes to see. Only this, that one hand stayed folded in another at sunset. That was enough to make an ordinary life into a legend. Dear friends, if this story has stirred your heart, pause a moment, share in the comments. Have you ever known a time when you felt truly seen by an eye, a hand, a word that turned the course of your days? We would be honored to hear those memories. For every story you tell becomes another small flame to guide the young who are still seeking their way. And if this tale warmed you, please like, subscribe, and share our channel with kin and friends. Every gesture of support helps us keep telling these Wild West love stories. Tales not loud but deep, enduring as the mountains themselves. For at any age, love and faith can still take root. And anywhere, even on a lonely ridge, there are those who choose to hold hands until the very